Good morning, everyone, and thank you. And so we're starting this day following the addresses of the Minister and the Treasury Director and our President Romane. Thank you for that. We're going to talk about decarbonization all day. Decarbonization is techniques and means to remove or limit carbon emission. And this session is about how infrastructure investment can be empowered to meet the decarbonization agenda. And when preparing the session, I just wondered, what's the decarbonization agenda? And I realized that, we all know the Paris Agreement. We all know the objective for Europe to be at the forefront of decarbonization and the net zero objective by 2050. But when you dig a bit into that, you realize that there are many decarbonization agendas. There's the G7, what is called Industrial Decarbonization Agenda, which was first pushed forward in 2021, and it focuses on near zero emission steel and cement production. So it's about decarbonizing heavy industry sectors. There's of course the European Green Deal, as I mentioned, and a subdivision of the European Green Deal is the French national low carbon strategy, which was first initiated in 2015 and then updated regularly. Which aims at reducing emissions by 40% in 2030 compared to 1990. And it's based essentially on new technology and carbon capture. And there's the France 2030 plan that we've been hearing a lot with 4 main subjects being green hydrogen, being biogas, electrification of processes, and of course, decarbonized power production and carbon capture uses and storage. So decarbonizing infra is a bit of twofold, right? First is building decarbonized infra, and that's going to be a tool to help decarbonizing or transitioning existing infra. So today we have a great roster of speakers with us and panelists, and I will start by asking you, how does the subject resonate within your own organization? So let's start with you, Estelle Castres. You're the Managing Director of Blackrock, country head of France, Belgium and Luxembourg. And so what does it mean to Blackrock decarbonizing?
Great, thank you so much, Patrick, and it's a pleasure to be here in FraBeLux, and thank you so much for Europlus and yourself for inviting me. First and foremost, really helping investors navigate the decarbonization agenda. This is really also helping them how to invest in transition infrastructure. And for us at Blackrock, it's really the most and the biggest opportunity of the decade. Why? It's because it's really at the intersection of many mega trends. The first one, of course, is investing into the transition of a low-carbon economy. The second one, demographies, growing population, urbanization, electrification, all of those, including mobility, is definitely also a key trend. Another one is really the fragmentation of the world with think offshore or onshoring supply chain, and of course the megatrend around AI, technology, digitalization that is putting high pressure in all of the power grid and the capacity to develop data centers. That said, if we look at really how we see transition, and not looking into 2050, but looking today, for Blackrock, there's really 3 big criteria that we analyze every day. It's very iterative, and that's really technology innovation today. how they are helping the decarbonization agenda. The second one is policies. Augustin de Romanet, the minister, they said about what France is doing, what Europe is doing. Think IRF in the US, think Green Deal in Europe. All of that is also moving towards the right way. The third one is really consumer preferences, and when we're speaking about investors, it's also investors' preferences. Think green bonds and the green premium. That's the type of element that we are analyzing. Then what we do is really by sectors, by geographies, using those three criteria, we are really looking into which are the sectors, the industries, but also the geographies that are already advancing their decarbonization agenda, that are today, when we do the projection, already advancing in the right position towards that decarbonization agenda and the 2050 objective. When we look at that, there's really, I would say it's a tale of two cities. You have on one side sectors or industries that are well advanced. Think of automotive electrification. That's well advanced. The International Energy Agency in its last report said that by 2030, 1 out of 2 cars that will be sold at the time will be electric cars. So that's well in advance. Now, there's also an Augustin de Romanet just said it, there's really a big need to drive also investment towards emerging countries and developing countries. Think today in the transition, infrastructure transition, we are investing altogether about $2 trillion a year. To get to that 2050 target, we should invest 4 trillion. And emerging countries, if you take China out of the scope, is only receiving 15% of those investments. So if we want to succeed in the transition, we need to find vehicles, we need to find solutions. And that's why Blackrock 3 years ago, with many governments, launched the Climate Finance Partnership, where through that blended finance vehicle, we really gathered catalytic investment from public money that allowed and enabled 4 times investment by private money, and we invested in countries like Bangladesh, Thailand, Philippines, Kenya in Africa, Brazil in Latin America. That's the type of solution.
Thank you, Estelle. So, Gwenola, you're the CEO and founders of Vauban. So, well, big actor and big player in the French, not in the French, a big French player in the global market of infrastructure. So, decarbonization, what does it mean to you?
So for us at Vauban, we are a long-term biennial investor. So from inception, those carbonization thesis was of paramount importance because we have to tackle the fact that those assets have to withstand adverse impacts in the future and don't end up as stranded assets. So decarbonization is key, both from a perspective of adapting existing infrastructure and also mitigating. So those two parameters are from inception analyzed and screen on any new investment that we do. And then we have to foster the discussion between all the ecosystem of our industry. So we did that initially with all the industrials with whom we work in order to help them have the appropriate tools to be up to the challenge, and therefore helping them actually reason on the investment thesis, how to adapt themselves, how to incorporate circular economy also tools, because at the end of the day we have to get out from the linear scheme which we had adopted since the last industrial revolution, because otherwise, as 90% of the materials that we are using are stuck in the market or in buildings, we have to change all these paradigm, and that's what we are trying to do. We have also launched a think tank, which is InfraVision, and the idea is really that to be up to the challenge, we have to act collectively. It's not a matter of just ourselves, it's how the industry is going to react fact, and trust me, when we talk with industrials, they are all trying to make their best efforts. We are trying to help them with the headache of CSRD, which is coming along, and everybody is trying to really make the appropriate efforts. I think the challenge is, are we going to be actually sufficiently active in due time, all of us, all the industry, because the challenge effectively weighs on our shoulders as infrastructure actors. We are those actually generating 75% of GHG emission. We are consuming 68% of virgin materials. This means the industry of infrastructure overall has a major role to play.
Well, yeah, indeed, and it's good to see, therefore, new players coming in France. Markus, you're a Chief Investment Officer at Aquila Capital Invest, and I know you're looking at France very closely at the moment. How does this resonate with decarbonization?
So thanks, Patrick. So Aquila Capital, indeed, I mean, we're looking into France as a market of great potential. We're a European infrastructure investor. We've been doing our first real assets investments in 2006, if I remember correctly. We've since then grown a footprint of roughly 14 billion euros worth of assets under management. And for all intents and purposes, we are really focused on the energy infrastructure. So that means, we're very active in Europe in the space of renewable energy generation. And we're now moving into the adjacent spaces that we think are defining the key trends for the next 5 to 10 years. So basically that means we're moving into support infrastructure. I mean, storage is a key strategic thematic for us. But also data centers is something that we see as a key macro trend that we intend to serve, and we're developing our own data centers. Just announced a partnership with Bain Capital on this. So that's really at the core of what we do. And when you ask what's your decarbonization agenda, I think it's best described as, look, we're aligning ourselves with the EU's Fit for 55 agenda. Yeah, so the focus is not so much on the net zero vision, basically in 2050, which is all relevant, but it's really focusing on what needs to happen in the next 5 to 10 years. So it's all about technologies that are ready to scale. And not only ready to scale, but also commercially viable. So I think we're big believers in that there is no opposing view in being sustainable and being economically driven at the same time. So all of our products, all strategies are driven by economic returns and by creating a positive impact. And that's a key message for us. And also we're big believers in that, look, energy doesn't need to be just sustainable, it needs to be affordable as well. So, the agenda basically, when you look at energy-intensive industries in Europe, they're all suffering from high energy prices. So we must find pathways basically not only to be sustainable, but also, provide sustainable energy at very low cost.
Yeah, thank you. So, Ilya, so you're Deputy Head of Global Banking and Advisory at Société Générale. Can you give us the point of view of the investment banker on this?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Patrick, and real pleasure to be at InfraWeek. Your question was how it resonates in our organization. So first, I would say that Société Générale, this agenda resonates everywhere. Today, all our decisions about capital allocation is made taking into account the decarbonization and energy transition point into account. Just to underline that, last Thursday, at announcing our Q3 results, we have announced a new target for supporting the energy transition through sustainable finance, and it's now 500 billion target up to 2030, out of which 400 billion in investments and 100 million in capital markets, debt capital markets. So it's a very ambitious target, and to achieve that, we are supporting the key sectors where decarbonization is at scale. And I would mention first sector, which is the mobility and transportation one. This is a sector where we are truly global, and we believe that a lot will happen, continue to happen in this space. This is about the mobility chain and the EV chain, and I'm sure we'll talk about this in greater details over this session, but that's where we are global. We're supporting a lot of projects in France and elsewhere. The most notable in France are the two projects in the French battery valley of the Gigafactory project of Vercors and AACC. And we are looking at supporting other projects in this topic elsewhere. The other part where we concentrate our effort is low carbon hydrogen. This is an important source of future energy according to our view, and this is also already helping to decarbonize some heavy industrial sectors such as steel. Again, to be concrete, you probably know all the example of H2 green steel. It's a project to produce steel out of green hydrogen in Europe, which is amazing, by the way, to have new industrial projects in Europe. We have not seen it for a very long time, and through the decarbonization and energy transition thematic, we have the industrialization of Europe, which has started again. And this H2 Green Steel project, on which we advised on debt and equity, is a good example how you can produce green steel out using green hydrogen as the key source of energy. I can continue with a lot of examples, but I know our time is very short.
You know, but I'm going to stay with you for the next question, which is around. I mean, what are the concrete areas in which, you know, the private infrastructure investors can make a difference, right? And I know we discussed a bit earlier, for instance, decarbonizing airports, and I'm sure you know Augustin Romanet would have his own view on that. But that's I mean there are sectors which are more challenging against decarbonization. So how can we, for instance, decarbonize airports?
As I mentioned, airports and overall transportation and mobility I put in the same sector are one of those sectors where decarbonization can really help to reduce the carbon footprint at scale. So the mobility sector, the transportation sector, including airports, is of huge importance for the decarbonization agenda. Talking about the airports, we all have in mind SAF as the topic in which a lot of things is happening. And I remember at the Infra Week of last year, Augustin de Romanet said that on SAF, this is the problem was on the supply side, and the more you produce, the demand is there. So this trend is continuing. The limitation is still on the supply side, but we see more and more projects on SAF coming on stream, and that's where we can help as bank to finance or advise on that. We have global funds also investing in that part. So that's how you decarbonize at scale the airports and the air traffic. But it's not only about SAF. You can find a lot of efficiency through energy efficiency in different parts of the airport setup. And this is also where a lot of airports, including Port de Paris, are doing a lot of efforts to reduce the energy consumption at every part of the chain. So it's really happening.
Yeah, so we can approach decarbonization by, I mean, including for airports, by many ways, right? SAF, but also energy efficiency. Markus, I mean, there's a lot of funding that is required to meet that agenda. So not everyone is going to look at the same things. So where do you think private investors can make a difference?
We heard earlier that the markets, or the sourcing capital in the last year and a half has been tough, right? So We're in an environment currently where interest rates are stubbornly high, where power price projections are very, very bearish, which makes attracting capital for investment, for instance, in energy infrastructure harder. But I think, we have a strong conviction that we're just about to enter a real paradigm shift in terms of how we should perceive renewable energy. I think in the last sort of a decade or two, we've always looked at sustainable energy as a means of substituting fossil-based energy. So it's driven by a political agenda, and it's a one-for-one exchange. And we think that fundamentally is going to change. We've looked historically at fairly static energy demand in Europe over the last 20 years, which is highly correlated to economic growth, etc., partially offset by efficiency gains. What we're seeing now is a structural change coming. So, and that structural change is driven by electric mobility, even if it's currently sort of going through a bit of a pause in terms of its rollout. It's driven by heat pumps, it's driven by electrification of industry, but it's also driven by the rollout of data centers. And I cannot emphasize this more. Data centers will substantially drive energy demand. So what's going to happen is that basically our forecast models in terms of energy demand going forward are fundamentally underestimating the demand that actually is going to take place over the next 5 to 10 years. And then the question is not going to be, how do we substitute coal-fired power plants, nuclear power plants with renewable energy? It's about how do we meet the electricity demand over the next 5 to 10 years. And this is really where renewable energy will be seen in a new light. It's all about sort of providing and meeting demand, and it's less about a political agenda. So we will see enormous price stimulus coming from that. And we're actually very, very optimistic on that end. But it needs to be paired with, for instance, storage solutions. It needs to be paired with grid reinforcements, etc. And it needs to be paired with a regulatory agenda that basically cuts down lead times towards, the developments or being permits, being grid access, etc.
Yeah, electrification of processes is a big part of decarbonization, but electrification of processes means more power required. So indeed, as you said, a big shift is in front of us. So Gwenola, where do you think the private investor is the most relevant?
I think we are, all of us, very much needed everywhere. When you think about the investment gap that is identified by EU Commission, it's 150 billion euro a year that is expected to be in desperate need to match, these net zero targets that we're seeking. And when you look at the investments appetite, they are actually massively going to invest in renewable energy, which was a natural area where to focus on, while at the end of the day we are forgetting that the bulk of our activity or of our society and infrastructure space has to be adapted. So we have to translate our existing infrastructure so that they are decarbonized, and this is requiring lots of capex. So we have to channel all this money both into the real economy that exists today and also into new infrastructure. So according to the Global Infrastructure Hub, 75% of infrastructures in 2050 are yet to be constructed, but we are still facing the issue of those existing infrastructures. So I think we have to find ways of having incentives from the public entities to frame appropriate programs of capex to be invested in. We need a regulation that is stable, and trust me, when you look at what has happened lately in Europe, it's not really the case. We are seeing situations in the Nordics where we had this windfall tax coming up, which put a challenge on effectively having a consistent pace of investments. So these are things we are in desperate need from the private sector perspective. We need stability of regulation, we need taxation, visibility, we need proper programs, and then we have to find the appropriate risk return where each investor will find its appropriate way of expressing itself. When you see, there are tons of new technologies that are in desperate need of investments, but these are going to fall into the venture capital space. And then if you want proper infrastructure investor going in that space, then we need help from the regulator. We need to find ways of business plans where investors are going to feel safe. That's my feeling.
Thank you. Estelle, do you have a different view?
Not a different, but maybe complementary and some example, if you may. So we really do believe that for private investors, this is really a unique opportunity, as I said before. It's really about being at the center and also benefiting from the transition. Markus said it before, a lot of really the key topics are around storage. We think that storage, but also decentralized power grid is really mega key. And I just want to highlight few emblematic investment, because clearly also the target is to be able to help private investors navigate the complexities of the transition, the different technologies around that. And just to give you a few example of investment that we made lately using those different technologies. The first one in terms of battery storage, we are building the largest battery storage in Australia currently. This is really Australia moving out of coal as their main power into greener system, and that's not only just storage for Sydney, so it's about 100 kilometers out of Sydney, and it's the size of 30 soccer pitch, just to have a view on the magnitude and the impact. And this is also to enable the grid to be much more reliable. So that's one example. In Australia, if we move back in Europe, what we're also doing is we're investing on behalf of our client in the biggest EV charging system that you can find in more than 24 countries. It's already 1,500 battery charging that you can find in toll roads, including in France. But also in terms of the different technologies, it's like mineralization of concrete that capture carbon and CO2, and that's also a carbon neutral solution. In France, if we move back to France, we're investing largely in renewables, because technology now allows really renewables to be much more efficient. And for those carbon that you can't really decarbonize properly through green energy or green powers, you have carbon capture. We are building one of the biggest open carbon capture system out of Texas. It's going to take more than 500,000 tons of CO2 per year. So that's the type of investment where we are helping our clients navigate those complexities.
Yeah, all of that very interesting and very exciting. In fact, so we've heard very positive things about meeting the decarbonization agenda. I'm afraid, Gwenola, there are challenges too in this environment, and not easy ones.
No, you're right, indeed, effectively. When you are, first of all, when you're talking to investors and I'm talking globally, the feedback from investors differs widely. If you go in Europe, all investors are very much into sustainability. This matters a lot, depending, where you go. The northerner you go, the most important those parameters are. And then when you move to the United States, you are getting feedbacks which are increasingly questioning the very nature of your long-term sustainability commitment. So we can see already that there are some investors which are questioning the fact that having a commitment to sustainability may or may not justify, the channeling of their investment into specific strategies. So at the end of the day, what they are questioning is a very return they're going to get from those investments, and why they have been massively incentivized to channel their money into impact investing strategies. They are now considering that maybe this has not bring the appropriate value for money. And this is something which is very actually it's a big issue, because at the end of the day, I think that what matters is to make sure that, and I think it is the case, ESG parameters are now mainstream. Everybody is actually incorporating those parameters. So we shouldn't be challenged on the fact that, you know, when we are investing, are we only focused on sustainability and is a return going to come with it? I think that is something which is incorporated in everybody's strategy, and then afterwards, the reality will be effectively the performance we are going to generate for investors. But this, you know, challenge, which is coming from the United States initially, is actually sinking in elsewhere in Europe. So we end up with investors having been interested in channeling their money into dedicated niche strategies, and which felt either they went into too risky areas in, like I was mentioning earlier, venture capital, where that was, you know, initially branded as infra, but it was actually very risky. Technology actually is taking its time. We've seen that small nuclear, you know, unit are effectively taking longer. Lots of things are actually more complicated than initially scheduled. And what investors are seeking is stability, is returns that are matching their initial expectations. And all this has to sink in all our market, where we end up having to invest, I think, in a diversified market of infrastructure where everybody is going to tackle those decarbonization issues that you mentioned earlier for the benefit of actually our whole industry.
Yeah, and to avoid that certain sectors benefit from a big flow of money coming in, and other subsectors are less financed, right? So, Markus, I think there's a question about the commercial case. There's a question about the technology risk that drives the investment.
Yes, so when you follow the public debate in Europe, but also elsewhere, then there's two magic words, basically, or two magic components always being mentioned. One is carbon capture, and the other one is hydrogen. And when we look at those two technologies, I mean, carbon capture, and I heard it mentioned today in your inaugural speeches. Carbon capture, of course, is very, very tempting. Yeah, I mean, you can keep running your existing plants, and your grid system stays intact, etc. Carbon capture is not new. Yeah, carbon capture has been in a debate with European utilities for the last 15 to 18 years. 15 years later, and we still don't have quite the economic model to make it work. And carbon capture itself, the technology is not challenging. The challenging part is what to do with the carbon afterwards. So do we store it, or do we put it to use? The only commercial use case for carbon at the moment is enhanced oil extraction. So I'm sure that doesn't fit with the climate agenda, but so it's really, really challenging to basically execute that in the real world. And with hydrogen, I mean, we've looked at many hydrogen projects. I think one of the key challenges with hydrogen is that it's also very, very hard to make it work in terms of you know, creating an opportunity that's investable for an infrastructure investor. I mean, a lot of these propositions that we're seeing, I just wonder, is this still infrastructure or is it venture capital? Yeah. And then the returns don't work. Yeah, it's capital intensive, high risk, and that makes it really, really hard for infrastructure investors to make this work. So again, I think, you know, sometimes we would hope that the political agenda sort of focuses more on, okay, real assets, real problems, how can we make this work in the short term? Yeah, and it comes down to permitting, it comes down to grid access, etc. Now, fortunately, that's not particularly attractive in the public debate to solve this, but that will be the key.
Thank you. Estelle, what are your challenges in this area?
So one of the main challenges, so I already talked about emerging market and the blended finance solution. Another one is clearly about AI. I was speaking in my intro about AI and the new demand for power. So think power data centers, new power needed to provide that power to those data centers. If you do today a search through AI, ChatGPT on another system, do you have any idea the extra consumption compared to conventional web search? It's about an average of 10 times. So this is clearly, and that's just today. So really just think today, AI, we're only seeing like the tip of the iceberg in terms of use, efficiency, productivity going forward. So there's absolutely a mega need to develop really power sources, data centers going forward. So that's definitely one key angle. But really speaking about also our investors investing long-term, what they are looking to do is really, they are looking into their portfolios in terms of not just I would say, one asset classes per se, like infrastructure and infrastructure transition. But they are really looking at their overall portfolio. And for us today in the infrastructure and the decarbonization agenda, there's so many angles of it. I think that in this roundtable we have really tackled some of those big themes. That's why I said that really decarbonization is really the one big opportunity of the decade, and that's also the reason why Blackrock acquired GIP, to create that platform, to be able to invest in a very diversified way, because you need to be diversified and diversify your risk, as Markus just explained, and that's exactly what we are bringing to our long-term investors.
Thank you. Ilya, what do you see as the most challenging in meeting this agenda?
I hope we'll stay positive after this part of our session, but of course there are a lot of challenges, and my colleagues have already mentioned a few of them. I would add two. The first one is geopolitical. We're living in a world which is becoming more and more fragmented, and if you look at some of the topics we discussed, for example, the EV chain, we see how the geopolitical fragmentation is affecting the decision-making on the EV chain, looking at Europe, for example. So that's one additional risks that we're living, which is becoming more and more intense in current times. And the second one is the stability of regulation, the taxes, and government's position. It was already mentioned by Gwenola as a risk. This is really key if we are, and the countries are serious about the energy transition, to have a very stable regulation, and that's key for investors. It's key for banks to have business models on which business plans on which we can take long-term decisions, because we're talking about long-term commitments, be it equity or debt, and it's really key. And unfortunately, we see signs in different parts of the world where some rules of the game are changing, and this is a real major risk for the energy transition agenda.
Thank you. So as you say, it's already time to conclude, and we're going to try and conclude on a positive note. So what is stimulating on your own decarbonization agenda? Ilya, for you.
Thank you, Patrick. And yes, let's end on this positive note. As I mentioned, the whole strategy of Société Générale Group is today about the ESG and the energy transition agenda, and a lot of what we're doing for our clients, but also for our internal teams, is around the commitments that the bank is taking on energy transition. You probably know that we've been one of the banks taking a very ambitious trajectory on reduction of our support to traditional oil and gas fossil fuel. We have announced a target of minus 80% reduction of our support to the upstream oil and gas sector by 2030 compared to 2019. We are now approaching the 2025, which is the mid-year cycle for us, and we are already at more than 50% of this ambition. So it's going ahead of plan. We are also taking some bold views in terms of allocation of capital to energy transition, and last year I talked on this panel about our initiative on a equity investment envelope for the energy transition, and now we are already rolling this out, and we have made a first investment and through the acquisition of a majority stake in Reed Management, which is the vehicle that we'll be using for deploying equity capital to support the emerging leaders of the energy transition, in addition to all our capabilities on debt advisory and financing. So this is a really bold commitment for a bank, which is usually not there for taking equity commitments, because we have much stronger players in that. But as we are bold about energy transition, we have done so. So these are just a few examples of what we do, and we are really long-term about that, and this is creating a lot of motivation inside our teams that the bank is staying committed to this agenda.
Clearly exciting indeed. Markus, what is going to drive you in the next few years?
So, building more renewable energy to meet the energy demand over the next 5 to 10 years. So I think there's a great opportunity in this space. We talked a lot about data centers and AI, and look, I mean, going in 5 years from 10 gigawatt of power demand to 30 gigawatt. Just in Europe alone, it just speaks for itself. It's 8%, 9% on top demand that nobody's addressing to this day. So there's a lot of life in it. I think what excites us as an opportunity is really building on the core of renewable energy generation, strategically pairing this with grid scale battery storage. So we're building large battery centers all across Europe. And then vertically integrating this with data centers. I mean, that's sort of a key narrative for the next 5 to 10 years, where we think that also for investors we can provide really attractive returns and have a positive climate impact. Yeah.
Estelle, what is driving Blackrock?
Yes, so you heard me a lot. I think there's a lot to be excited about that decarbonization agenda and for infrastructure. So infrastructure is really playing an asymmetric role in the transition. Decarbonization means that you have to take those bets about technology and about timing. So definitely this is really where you need the scale, you need the diversification within your portfolio, and that's our target at Blackrock, is to be able to offer that to our clients and help them navigate that complexity of the transition. And I just want to finish with one last example of investment, because we've been talking about technology in this roundtable, and early stage technology is also super paramount in the future of the decarbonization. And I just want to give another example. So through our joint venture with Temasek, decarbonization partner, we have developed a battery that is really a hot rock battery during the day, heated by solar and wind, and transmitting that power to giant industries around the clock. That's the type of investment. Super early stage, hence a risk, but you need to diversify it.
Yeah. Investing in early stage. I mean, the last word will be with you,
what makes Vauban tick, I would tend to say that what we like is, when you look at infrastructure per se, it has evolved so dramatically. We were supposed to be basically historically caretakers of infrastructure that looked really static. And nowadays, it is no static at all. We are transformative investor. We are actually making those infrastructures look different, and we have a very strong responsibility. So what makes us tick is to see that those infrastructure in which we are investing for the long term are evolving. They are becoming much more respectful of the environment. They are more inclusive. They are, in fact, evolving with the population they serve. And this is something which we can observe by being a long-term investor. Those CapEx programs that we launch won't actually realize effects in 2 to 3 years. They take much longer. And this is what we are seeing every day, working hand in hand with industrials. They are very much proactively taking up those challenges, and that is what we really like.
Yeah, inclusive infrastructure. I like the concept. I think we'll hear more about that this week.
We have a conference on that.
I think on Wednesday, right?
Exactly. We are holding a conference for our think tank InfraVision, where we will tackle how infrastructure can effectively be more inclusive. And I think we really need that.
Well, thank you very much. I want to thank our panelists for this great session and also for being perfectly on time. We even have time to take maybe one question or two if there are any.
Hi. Just this weekend, I was reading the FT, and I saw it was a small article, and it was talking about data centers and how with the additional energy and heat that's generated, which is very worrisome, I've actually been very worried about the additional demand for energy. And I read that actually some places like Frankfurt are looking at utilizing the heat generated from data centers for district heating. I haven't come across those projects, but I found it fascinating and exciting, kind of talking to your point. Have you come across those projects?
I think, Markus, we had discussed that a bit during our prep session, the data center being used for heating.
So, yes, I mean, we know of this project. So it's a project that is certainly very exciting. So I think you need to make use of any hybridization opportunity, right? So, I mean, if it's the heat offtake for district heating, I mean, that will be one of the examples. I think in general with data centers, I mean, the way we look at this is you need to locate the data centers. I mean, it's driven by, first and foremost, do you have enough power at that location, right? I mean, that's the key driver, right? And the second driver is then where does the energy come from? And so the way we're looking at it is we're going into locations that are either from a climate background, more suited towards the cooling aspect of it. I mean, pardon the pun, but Nordic countries are a good place for this. So, you know, one of our data centers is based in Oslo, or where there's an abundant supply of sustainable energy, right? So that's what we're looking at Spain as an opportunity, right? So in Spain, we can build large amounts of solar capacity combined again with batteries. I mean, so that's one of the key aspects. I think when it comes to making use of that, of the heat as a byproduct, I think where possible, we need to do this. I think one of the challenges is really you would need a near urban utilization for this, right? So Frankfurt is a good example. London will be a good example. I think the further north you go, right, northern Norway, etc., then it becomes a bit more difficult to find offtakes for that.
Or decentralized data center, smaller data center in residential buildings or office building. That could be a way of hybrid use, right? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this session and have a good day.
Thank you.